Welcome to episode 37 of the 3am Fear podcast. One Saturday afternoon in 1952, Bill suddenly felt an icy chill run through his body. It was so cold that the water froze on his skin and a terrible smell made him feel sick. He felt an irresistible urge to run away to the beach and live with the wolves. But just as the strange impulse was about to consume him completely, he heard his mother's distant call, summoning him to wash up for dinner.
Bill was only 9 years old.
As he reluctantly made his way back home and dipped his hands into the cold water to clean them, an immense weight descended upon him. Bill had this feeling, this intense anger building up within him, a feeling he had never experienced before. Since that fateful day, this anger would only continue to grow, and he would start losing control over himself. The friendly and simple boy he once was began to fade away. In fits of anger, he would throw himself back into his mother's garden, overwhelmed by the urge to destroy things. Bill couldn't understand why was this happening to him. Where were these emotions coming from? But despite all this, he couldn't ignore them. Bill marched over to the chicken wire fence that his father had placed around the garden. Something strange had taken hold of him, giving him superhuman strength. He firmly grabbed onto one of the wooden fence posts with his bare hands and effortlessly pulled it out from the ground. The post was no small thing. It was large and set in concrete, yet Bill lifted it as if it was nothing at all. From the kitchen window, his parents watched in horror. Bill seemed to possess some kind of demonic force, his body charged with adrenaline, granting him extraordinary strength. He swung the fence post around like a club, smashing its concrete end onto the ground. After destroying the post, he tossed its remains aside and revealed his shiny teeth by curling his lips. Then he turned to the chicken wire mesh and began gnawing at it like an animal. The cold chill that had gripped him earlier returned, and Bill let out a menacing growl into the air. He didn't stop there. He kept chewing through the fence. His parents were standing there in shock, wondering what had happened to their sweet little Bill. As unusual and terrifying as this incident was, Bill's parents thought that maybe this was a one-time thing, something strange that happened and would never happen again. Little did they know that it was only the beginning of a strange journey that would involve werewolves and mysteries.
Hello and welcome to the 3am Fear podcast. I'm Nikita, Ferrao, mystery and thriller author. On this podcast, I talk about real crimes and real people. Due to the graphic nature of some of this content, listener discretion is advised. You can find the episode show notes on my website 3amfear.com. Let's get started.
Despite that one episode of anger and superhuman strength, Bill managed to lead a normal life for almost 15 years after that first incident had happened in his mother's garden. His anger seemed to disappear and he grew up to become a skilled wood joiner, working in carpentry. He crafted doors, windows and staircases in a local workshop in Southend. Bill also got married to a woman named Nina and went to have 3 children, and even welcomed a dog named Shadow into their family. Bill tried his best to control his feelings of anger and those animal urges that would come once in a while. He attempted to bury these deep inside and never tried to show them to anyone. The freezing chill from that fateful day of 1952 often haunted him, and he wondered, how did that happen? What happened that day? He would have constant nightmares in the early years of marriage, afraid that those feelings would come back. In these dreams, he would find himself creeping behind his wife in a foggy field while crickets chirped around them. As they walked alone through the woods, he drew nearer and nearer, but just as he was about to reach out to touch her, she would suddenly turn to face him. Her piercing eyes seemed to stare right through him, and in a panic state, he would try to run away. However, a sudden burst of energy would jolt him awake in his dark bedroom. Bill would be lying on his back, drenched in cold sweat, gasping for air, overwhelmed by the feelings of anguish and dread as a familiar cold chill washed over him. In 1967, the nightmare stopped and life seemed normal again for the next 15 years. But in 1983, something strange happened. Bill was at a local pub with his friends when he suddenly felt this icy chill from childhood. Struggling to control himself, Bill stumbled towards the restroom. He could feel his anger building inside, and he leaned over the bathroom sink. When he looked up into the mirror, he saw a startling image. His own face, but distorted, with hair like a wild wolf. Overwhelmed by this terrifying experience, Bill left the restroom and told his confused friends that he immediately wanted to get home. They agreed, concerned for his well-being. As he stood over the table, cold sweat started to pour down his face. Bill's animal urges surged to the surface. Unable to stop himself any longer, he began growling while sitting in the passenger seat of his friend's car. His posture shifted, his lips curled into a snarl, and his hands twisted into claw-like shapes. Suddenly, he lunged at his friend, aiming for his leg, and took a painful bite. Bill's friend screamed in horror and struggled to control the car, swatting at Bill to keep him away. They pulled over to the side of the road, still wrestling to control the vehicle. In a moment, a confused and apologetic look crossed Bill's face. He had no memory of what had just happened. He quickly apologized to his friend and decided to walk the rest of the way home, trying to understand what had just happened. On December 5th, 1983, a few weeks after his 40th birthday, something disturbing happened to Bill. He had just enjoyed dinner with his family and was on his way to work the night shift at a taxi company, trying to earn some extra money. But as he drove, he suddenly felt sharp pain shooting through his chest. He thought that he was having a heart attack. Fearing for his death, he drove himself to the emergency room. As he continued driving, the pain in his chest worsened and he struggled to catch his breath. By the time he reached the hospital entrance, an all too familiar freezing feeling crept over him. He was afraid that one of those wolf-like experiences was coming back. After checking in with the hospital staff, Bill experienced a terrifying transformation. Suddenly, he let out a growl, not like a human, but like a wolf. In his mind, he could see images of a wolf hunting his prey. His behavior took a scary turn as he stood up and growled at the nurse who was trying to measure his blood pressure. The situation got worse when Bill bit down hard on the nurse's arm, drawing blood and causing her to scream. Another nurse in the room joined in, trying to help and pull Bill down. In a desperate attempt to escape, the second nurse rushed towards the door to seek help, but Bill blocked her way. Fortunately, a patrolling police officer was in the hospital when he heard this noise and came rushing to help the nurse. What he found was beyond belief. There, in the corner of the room, crouched a man who looked wild and untamed, growling like an animal. It was Bill. The officer and a large male intern took hold of Bill, trying to free the nurse from his grip. Among the chaos, Bill threw furniture at them and kept growling. He repeatedly broke free from their attempts to restrain him and tried to bite them as well. The situation was getting out of control. Finally, the intern managed to grab Bill from behind, and with the officer's help, they managed to strap him into a gurney. A doctor, alerted by this confrontation, arrived into the room. They administered sedatives to Bill, finally putting an end to the turmoil. After the 1983 hospital incident, right before Christmas, Bill was advised to stay at the hospital, but he decided to check out in January of 1984 after visiting his mother. But on that day, he felt that same icy cold sensation again, and he could feel himself changing once more. He rushed back to the same hospital where he had attacked that nurse. Once inside, without any warning, he started attacking hospital workers with his superhuman strength, his teeth exposed like a rabid animal. It took police officers to finally subdue him. Bill was arrested for violent episode, and the authorities believed that there was something wrong with him. They recommended that he check into a mental institution, but Bill was not ready for that. The mystery surrounding his condition deepened. Bill didn't want to be labeled as a crazy person, and even though he had all these strange episodes, he was released in the summer of 1987. On July 22nd, Bill, who was now 43 years old, had just wrapped up another tiring day at work. Britain was going through an economic recession, and Bill was taking on extra jobs to make ends meet. After work, Bill dropped off some of his co-workers and decided to stop at the White Horse Inn for a drink. One drink turned into several, and as the night wore on, he had a bit too much to drink. Despite knowing that he shouldn't do it, Bill decided to drive home. To avoid the main roads and potential police checks, Bill took a route through a neighborhood which was known for its red light district. It was during this journey that he encountered Lauren Reynolds, a sex worker who was working the streets that night. Lauren had already noticed a man in a van tailing her slowly for several minutes. Suddenly, the man came and pulled ahead of her. Without coming to a stop, he leaned over, pushed the door open, and asked her to get in. Although Lauren was hesitant, she needed the money that night, so she got into the van. She recalled that the man looked pleasant at first, but there was something about his eyes, something that she just couldn't put into words. As they drove in silence for a while, Lauren's fear grew. She mustered the courage to tell him that she wanted to leave. To her surprise and horror, Bill, who was now behind the steering wheel, informed her that he was placing her under a citizen's arrest. Bill later admitted that he had no idea why he was doing that. He just felt like he needed to take her to the police station. Perhaps he was afraid that he would do something to her, but we are unclear on that. As they approached the police station, Bill started to change once more, and Lauren noticed it. She fled into the police station for safety. Bill started to feel that icy sensation again and the pressure in his chest. He was changing. A police officer, much bigger than Bill, approached his car. Without much fear, the officer touched Bill's arm. In an instant, Bill attacked the officer, choking him until help arrived. Other officers rushed to restrain Bill, but he displayed such incredible strength that it took almost a dozen police officers and 2 injections to overpower him. His superhuman strength was surprising. After this violent assault, Bill finally decided to check himself into a mental institution. He feared not only for his safety, but also the safety of others. The institution conducted various tests, including MRIs, X-rays, and psychiatric evaluations. But despite all this, they could not find out the reason to why Bill was acting this way. He seemed perfectly normal. The attack on the police officer brought Bill's case into international headlines, leaving people puzzled and concerned to what was happening to him. Bill was now famously known as the Southend Werewolf. He continued to have all these violent episodes without any reason. Every time he would find himself back into the police station and he would beg the officers to lock him up until he calmed down and he was ready to get out. At this point, Ed and Lorraine Warren, renowned paranormal investigators, heard about Bill's case. Edward Warren and Lorraine Rita Warren, the popular Ed and Lorraine Warren couple, were American paranormal investigators. Ed was a self-taught demonologist, author and lecturer. Lorraine, on the other hand, was a medium. Ed and Lorraine had founded NESPER, the New England Society for Psychic Research. The basic focus of the company is for Ed and Lorraine to visit all these haunting places and perform exorcisms. They would not perform these exorcisms on their own, but they always had a priest with them. Throughout their life, the couple have claimed to have investigated over 10,000 cases. And in this podcast, we have covered a lot of Ed and Lorraine cases, which I will be listing in the description if you're interested in listening to the others, because they are quite interesting. Initially, Ed and Lorraine were skeptical and thought that maybe this was a hoax. But after talking to Bill, his family, and the police officers, they believed that maybe there was something true to it. Nobody really knows exactly how someone could become a werewolf. Some stories say that if you're bitten by a werewolf, you could turn into one. Some others say that if you wear a wolf's skin as a jacket, then you could turn into one. According to the legend, there are certain signs that can identify one as a werewolf, like having hair between your eyebrows, under your tongue, or hidden within the flesh. It is also said that a werewolf's eyes shine brightly. But in Bill Ramsey's case, none of these things applied. Other than his strange physical changes during his episodes, like his hands turning into claw-like structures, he didn't have anything else. He didn't have any extra hair, his eyes didn't shine. He didn't look like a werewolf, he just turned into one. Ed Warren explained to Bill that what he was going through seemed like a demonic possession. Maybe he was possessed by a spirit. So the solution had to come from inside him, like pushing out whatever was inside and causing this problem. The idea comes from old stories in medieval Europe where many werewolf legends originated. The Warrens came to this conclusion that Bill might be possessed by a demon or an animal spirit. They convinced him to come to their church in Connecticut for an exorcism. This exorcism was going to be performed by Bishop Robert McKenna, an experienced exorcist. Now everything seemed good except for one problem. Bill needed to travel all the way from Southend to Connecticut for Ed and Lorraine to supervise his exorcism. Now Bill was a simple carpenter and he had limited money. He couldn't afford such an expensive trip. Fortunately for him, Bill's recent fame due to his werewolf story helped him out. His story had spread through the newspapers and had become a worldwide sensation. Bill sold his story to a British newspaper for $20,000, more than enough to cover his trip to the United States. In July of 1989, 37 years after the strange incident in his mother's backyard, Bill Ramsey and his wife finally arrived in Connecticut, hoping to find a solution to all of his problems. During this time, another violent incident occurred. In the middle of the night, Bill choked his wife in his sleep, and he had no memory of it. At the beginning of the exorcism, Bill was doubtful. The bishop chanted in Latin, trying to cast out this demon. But Bill felt nothing at first. He started to wonder if he was just wasting his time over here. But soon, something changed in the room. Bill began to squirm in his chair, and his face started to twist. The muscles in his neck grew larger, and the veins on his forehead popped out. Bishop McKenna, although hopeful, was ready for anything. The anger and violence in Bill were taking over. He snarled, bared his teeth, and his eyes turned wild. His fingers seemed to morph into claw-like shapes. Lorraine Warren even claimed that his physical features started to change, with his ears looking more pointed and his face appearing more feral. Bishop McKenna kept a steady tone during the ceremony, not letting the demon intimidate him. He knew showing weakness would make the wolf spirit even stronger. Each time the bishop made a holy sign, Bill winced in pain. It seemed like something was breaking inside him. Bill's shoulders slumped and his hands turned into claws. He swiped in the air, grimacing. With every single sign of the cross, Bill felt a sudden surge of energy. Finally, Bishop McKenna saw progress. The bishop held up a crucifix and ordered the demon to leave Bill's body immediately. But instead of listening, Bill became even more aggressive and hostile. He lunged at the bishop, who had police officers nearby. The bishop urged him to stand down while he continued the exorcism. The entire process took about 40 minutes, and as Bill slowly collected himself from the traumatic process, things started to change. Just when it seemed like Bill wouldn't stop and might even harm the bishop, something incredible happened. Bill's body suddenly went limp, and he let out one last growl. It was believed that the demon had finally left his body. After the exorcism, Bill claimed that he never experienced any more violent episodes. He was able to lead a peaceful and normal life. Ed and Lorraine Warren were so convinced about this case's authenticity that they even wrote a book on it. The book is called Werewolf, a true story of demonic possession. Now the question that I'm asking you is, do you think that Bill was truly possessed by a demon animal spirit? Well, according to Ed and Lorraine Warren, they firmly believed that he was, and many others shared their belief. But there are a few who think that maybe there was nothing supernatural about it. Now there are different opinions. Some believe that maybe it was a mental condition and Bill genuinely thought that he was an animal, and when Ed and Lorraine Warren along with their priest did the exorcism, Bill believed within himself that the animal spirit had left the body. Now out of everything, there's one thing that everyone agreed on, and that was Bill had extraordinary strength. Throughout these years, whenever he had any situation, whenever he felt that icy cold chill down his back, he had superhuman strength. And that's not something that anyone can just have. The case of Bill Ramsey, now known as the Southend Werewolf, remains a baffling mystery. Interestingly, after 1992, Bill seemed to disappear from public knowledge. He was never seen in any other episode. No one knows where he is. No one knows what happened to him. What we all know is the story told by Ed and Lorraine Warren and the interviews given by Bill. It's up to you who listen to the story to decide what it is. Was this a paranormal event? Was there a spirit at play here? Or was it a mental condition, something that Bill was unaware of and something that went undiagnosed for years and then disappeared one fine day? What do you think? A big thank you to all my fellow listeners who have been listening to all my episodes. Thank you so much. Your listens, your support means a lot. If you love my podcast, if you love the stories that I put out, then please do follow me on whichever podcasting platform you are listening from, and please do leave a rating. It will really help me a lot. You can listen to me on other platforms including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and any other podcasting platform. If you are in India, you can always listen to my podcast on Ghana or JioSaavn. If you love to listen to strange and mysterious stories, then follow me on Instagram and YouTube, where I put out reels on such stories. These are completely different from the ones that I put out on my podcast, so do follow me on them. If you love travel, you can follow me on my travel channels. I'll link them also in the description. Until then, stay kind and stay safe out there.